Our next session, I'm very much looking forward to, having had a chance to read Karen's books. I know that she has tremendous insights to offer us on our program this afternoon. And so to introduce Karen McGinnity, I would like to invite the Rabbi of the Society for Humanistic Judaism, as well as the Associate Professor for Professional Development at the International Institute, Rabbi Miriam Jerris.
Well, this is a thrill. You know, when we're children, we all have dreams about what we want to be when we grow up. And one of my dreams was to be a rabbi, so that worked. But my other dream was to be an academic. So, Karen, you're what I wanted to be. And you are in many ways. So, what I'm left with in knowing that I fulfilled one dream and not the other is this tremendous admiration for someone who made that academic choice, the choice that I envy. And I'm really compelled by Dr. Karen McGinnity's work because her research happens to be my primary interest. You know, go no. And so personally and academically and professionally, our approaches are so consistent. Both my master's and my doctoral work was in the area of intermarriage, and I did qualitative studies, and when you read Karen, you see the qualitative nature of her work. And also, I'm one of those women who married out, who fell in love with someone who happened to be something other than Jewish, and I still found a way to stay involved in Judaism and the Jewish community. I don't share that same hysterical response to intermarriage that is shared by much of the Jewish community, and neither does Dr. McGinnity. Intermarriage is a positive consequence of a free and open society. People marry because they fall in love, not because they're rebelling against parents or have negative Jewish experiences when they're children. What Karen has done in her two remarkable books is to describe the experiences of women in Still Jewish, Vanna White, and the experiences of men in her, as she put it, warm off the press, new book, Marrying Out. I enjoyed listening to a podcast of an interview with Dr. McGinnity regarding her new book, examining the experiences of intermarried men. She also spoke to some of the wives of those men, mostly because the men said to her, "You really have to talk to my wife." Now, oddly, obviously, or ironically, most of the women from the first book did not suggest that she should talk to their husbands. But in addition to authoring these two wonderful books, Dr. McGinnity has impressive academic credentials, receiving her PhD from Brown University, as well as degrees from both Harvard and Rutgers. She was the inaugural Mandel L. Berman Postdoc Research Fellow in Contemporary American Jewish Life at the U of M Frankel Center for Judaic Studies. And by the way, in Michigan, there's only one U of M. She also now serves as a research associate at the Hadassah Brandeis Institute and as a research affiliate at the Cohn Center for Modern Jewish Studies at Brandeis University. She has taught multiple subjects from ethnic literature to gender studies, history, and sociology. And there's more, and it's all available on her very accessible and interesting website, loveandtradition.com. So I am really honored to introduce my new friend, Dr. Karen McGinnity, who will speak to us today on gendered reality of Jewish intermarriage.
Thank you, Miriam, for that introduction. Thank you, Adam, for inviting me. Thanks to Sue, who I know can hear me outside, for picking me up from the airport. There's something really special about coming here and being enveloped by this family and by this community. And I'm feeling it and I'm enjoying it. So I thank you all for being here. If we could advance to the first slide, please. Although much has been said and written about Jewish intermarriage, very little scholarship has looked at change over time or gender to explain experience and identity. Tenacious negative assumptions prevail. Fortunately, some Jewish leaders are more insightful than others. Rabbi Lawrence Kushner once wrote, "We now have enough data to say categorically that there is simply no way to stop vast numbers of Jews from marrying non-Jews. Fierce rabbinic bans are risibly ineffective. Insulting forms of covert ostracism only make us look xenophobic and weak. And insisting that we are a people, but with no publicly identifiable characteristics, makes us look either racist or stupid. Spiritual and cultural strength is measured not by rigidity or power, but by vitality and flexibility of the response." End quote. Now, some folks may know that Rabbi Kushner held a pulpit in Massachusetts, Sudbury, Massachusetts, for nearly 3 decades. But what many folks may not know is that Rabbi Kushner's grandfather eloped with a Presbyterian woman who chose, a few years later, to become Jewish. Both her grandsons and her granddaughter are rabbis. Their family history illustrates the gendered reality of Jewish intermarriage in America, my focus today. By taking a longitudinal approach and using gender as a primary category of analysis, I argue that a new paradigm for understanding the meaning of intermarriage emerges. My first book, Still Jewish, is the first history of American Jewish women who intermarried during the 20th century. Immigrant women who came to the promised land of religious freedom chose their own husbands rather than use the services of a matchmaker. Intermarried Jewish women in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s wed during a Depression-era resurgence of public opinion that really reinforced traditional gender roles and, with a temporary interlude for the duration of World War II, encouraged American wives to really embrace domesticity, leave world affairs to men. Now, a variety of historical factors made marrying out more conceivable to some Jewish women and more possible. The increasing visibility and, to some degree, acceptability of intermarriage between Catholics and Protestants between 1930 and 1960, and a new abundance of social science studies and lay and advice literature contributed to making intermarriage seem more common in American society at large. American Jewry's decreasing traditionalism and secularization were other factors. And the economic and social climate during World War II that increased Jewish women's opportunities outside the home fostered encounters with Gentile men through greater integration in non-Jewish circles, in higher education, professionalized employment, and suburban living. While secularism, assimilation, and social contacts made intermarriage more possible, experiences with anti-Semitism sometimes provided the motivation. The 1947 film Gentleman's Agreement, based on the novel by Laura Zemetkin Hobson, a formerly intermarried Jewish woman, brought the issue of anti-Semitism into the public eye. Many personal recollections suggest that discrimination was a significant part of why some intermarried Jewish women married the men that they did, because it was very present in their consciousness when they spoke with me. Jewish women who sought inclusion within a new fold usually chose Unitarianism over Catholicism or one of the strictly Protestant denominations. It's worth noting that of the women who intermarried in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, 1/3 eventually found their way to the Unitarian Church. and 2/3 continued to identify only as Jewish. That a majority of the women did not take on their husband's religion is remarkable given the contemporary pressure on American wives to be subordinate to their husbands, which increased during the immediate post-war years. Unitarian Universalism, the no dogma, no creed religion, offered something unique to Jewish women who married Christians. It enabled them to locate a religious middle ground with their spouses, one that did not ask them to renounce their inherited faith and adopt another. Anne Carlton, who was born in 1933 and grew up near the Jersey Shore, commented that it was very easy to become a Unitarian because I could still practice some of my Jewish things. She was considered the Jewish authority at her Unitarian church. She conducted the Seder for the Sunday school class and brought in Jewish food. However, growing up with anti-Semitism caused her to resist full disclosure about the Jewish part of her identity. I'll always admit that I'm Jewish, if asked, but I don't come forward all the time and say that I am. Jewish identity within intermarried women's senses of self was not solely a matter of religion or ethnicity or race, but rather a complex mix of the three. Religion could be changed, as some did when they intermarried. Ethnicity and race were flexible, yet tenacious. How women perceived of themselves influenced the ways in which they identified. Roughly 1/3 of the women I interviewed who intermarried in the 30s, 40s, and 50s ceased to identify actively as Jewish, yet maintained that being Jewish was part of their ethnic background. I'm thinking about Adam's talk last night, you can't change your grandparents. The majority insisted that they were and always would be Jewish by bloodline, implying that Jewishness was a racial trait as uncontrollable as one's DNA. In intermarriage, ethnic identity and religious identity were not distinct characteristics, but rather one conditioned the other. Being Jewish also stuck with women regardless of whether they intermarried or even chose to identify otherwise. Still Jewish was a double entendre for women who did not feel Jewish, but believed that they were Jewish by descent and due to the social understanding of who is a Jew. The Jewish label was socially constructed as permanent. It could not be erased by intermarriage or conversion. The 1960s and 1970s represent a real turning point in intermarriage history. Thriving political and social liberalism in American society facilitated the intermarriage of Jewish women with non-Jewish men by driving religious and racial prejudice, if not out of existence, at least further underground. Anti-Vietnam fervor that began with a small protest mushroomed into widespread public dispute of American policy, conscientious objection, and draft evasion. If the American people could openly denigrate the government, certainly some Jewish women and men could defeat their parents' wishes and marry the so-called other. The counterculture spirit that evolved attacked the traditional values, behavior, and relationships of most Americans. Among these socially turbulent times when make love, not war, was a popular motto, marrying someone of a different religion became another of many ways to rebel and thwart social convention. Involvement in political circles and political activities contributed to making ideas and politics more significant than religious differences. Ellen Kolakowski was born in Hartford, Connecticut in 1943 and intermarried for the second time in 1973. She described liberal thinking, integration between blacks and whites, the increase in divorce, and the increasing acceptability of intermarriage, all contributing to how people found mates outside their own religion. Quote, because you were meeting people more based on your political stance, your social stance, rather than my life of meeting people through the temple and the youth group activities and Hillel and staying in that little circle. All of a sudden it was open. You were going to rallies. You were going to the Arlington Street Church because that's where the most radical liberal stuff was happening. So you weren't going there to pray. You were going there to meet the movers and shakers in the political world. Now, once political similarities brought Jewish women and Gentile men together, religious differences were insufficient to keep them apart. Modern ecumenism, cooperation and collaboration among organized religions, likewise brought down fences separating one faith from another. Moreover, marriage was becoming increasingly secular. The expansion of higher education, the civil rights movement, the new ethnic consciousness, and the election of the first Roman Catholic president in 1960 all contributed to greater tolerance of diversity. The U.S. Supreme Court decision in Loving v. Virginia declared miscegenation laws unconstitutional in 1967, making it legal for Jewish white women to marry black men of whatever religion. A significant decline in anti-Semitism also increased Jewish women's prospects for finding a spouse outside of Judaism. Illustrating the dual influences of feminism, Jewish feminism in particular, and ethnic revivalism. Women who intermarried in the 1960s and 70s were considerably more adamant about their being Jewish, with few exceptions, than those who intermarried earlier in the century. Thus, while some Jewish women were comfortable marrying a Gentile, and I use that term specifically, they were not comfortable being mistaken for one. This intense objection to the potential of being mistakenly identified as a non-Jew marks a significant change from some of the women who intermarried at mid-century and did not proactively identify as Jewish, admitting being Jewish only if asked. The intensified association between a woman's name and her Jewish identity was really part of the historical context of Jewish feminism, in which increasing numbers of women came forward to claim their religious and ethnic heritage. Marrying a Gentile, combined with motherhood, raised most women's consciousness about Jewish identity and about Judaism. Jewish women who intermarried between 1980 and 2000 were among an unprecedented number of Jews who married Gentiles. And yet, they embraced the historically gendered notion of the Jewish woman as a maternal keeper of the domestic flame of Judaism. Most of these Jewish women believed that it was their responsibility to instill an understanding of Jewish history and culture, if not Judaism, in their children. Having children made the intermarried Jewish women I interviewed decidedly proactive about making Jewish connections, about observance, and about Jewish education. In the 1980s and 1990s, intermarried Jewish women increasingly made sure, even more so than their predecessors who intermarried in the 1960s and 70s, that their children received more Jewish religious and cultural education than they themselves had. Whereas some women who intermarried in the 1960s and 70s disassociated Jewish education from Jewish identity, relying on bloodline, women who intermarried at the end of the 20th century were considerably more committed to Jewish identification through education. Women who intermarried in the 1980s and 90s seemed less convinced than their predecessors that their children's Jewish identity was absolute or dependent on matrilineal descent. Whether their children would be Jewish depended intimately on the choices women made about Jewish education and lifestyle. My key finding regarding the history of some intermarried Jewish women dismantles assumptions about intermarriage and lack or loss of Jewish identity. By using gender as a primary category of analysis, it became evident that intermarried Jewish women actually became more interested in Jewishness and invested in Judaism over time rather than less. Although intermarried Jewish women illustrate some of American women's gains toward equality with men, such as greater education and employment opportunities, they also demonstrate the tenacity of gendered behaviors when it came to domesticity and religion. Intermarried Jewish women consistently had careers and more responsibility for child rearing and domestic religion than did their Gentile husbands. By voluntarily doing all of the necessary planning and most of the physical labor involved in religious observance and cultural participation, they thereby reinforced the social expectation of women as the purveyors of Judaism that was increasingly practiced in the home, in addition to or instead of the synagogue. So, where does that leave intermarried Jewish men? Is the upside of being an intermarried Jewish woman the downside of being an intermarried Jewish man? A current argument regarding intermarriage in America is that Jewish husbands are ambivalent about Judaism and less proactively vocal than their Gentile wives about how children will be raised. According to one sociologist, quote, intermarried men who have negative feelings about Jews and Jewishness are the weak link in contemporary American Jewish life, end quote. The fact is that the majority of American Jews do not report that religion is very important to them. And yet, intermarried Jewish men continue to be singled out as having the least interest. Popular culture depicts at least two significant issues in contemporary American Jewish life: the declining engagement of Jewish males post-bar mitzvah, and the intricate relationship between masculinity and Jewish identity. In one example, a rabbi tells a Jewish boy preparing for his bar mitzvah that the event signals his becoming a man. The boy interprets this transition in life to mean not greater responsibility in the Jewish community, but that he will be qualified to engage in greater sexual relations. At least that is what the writers for the popular sitcom Seinfeld suggested to American viewers. Let's take a quick look at an episode from the final season.
Congratulations, Mr. Lipman.
Oh, Elaine. My boy's a man today. Can you believe it? He's a man.
Congratulations, Adam.
Tongue?
Yeah.
Wow. I didn't try that till I was 23.
This kid's not just a man, he's a man's man.
My friend's been telling his friends. I got invitations to 6 more bar mitzvahs.
In a subsequent scene, when Elaine explains that there is much more to being a man, the bar mitzvah boy says, "As of this moment, I am no longer Jewish. I quit." He renounces his religion. Popular culture likewise reinforces the gender division of labor in the home, and where some Jewish men's interests lie outside of it. The next clip is from Sex and the City. The bar mitzvah boy has indeed become a man in the American sense. He is a successful attorney and has reached a marriageable age.
What's all this?
Well, since it's our first Shabbos together, I wanted to make it a little special.
A little? This is phenomenal.
I just need to get the candles and then we can say the bracha.
Carlos Silva Roland pitches in at third. Cedeno squares, Bond's foul.
Oh, come on.
He was sacrificing. He was trying to drop one down as though he was...
Honey, please turn that off. We're about to eat.
Not a good-looking play at all.
Smells incredible. And you made brisket. I cannot believe you made brisket.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Shabbat. Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos, sweetie. I cannot believe you made all this. What did I do to deserve you?
I feel the same way. I've been thinking about blessings, and you are such a blessing to me. What are you... Why is the TV on?
It's on mute.
Mute? Mute? We're having Shabbos dinner.
It's a big game, honey.
Turn it off. I want you to turn it off right this minute.
But it's...
Off now.
Let me just watch this one pitch.
I gave up Christ for you, and you can't give up the Mets?
It's gonna be a long life if you keep that up. I gave up Christ for you. Take out the trash. I gave up Christ for you. Pick up your socks.
Can't watch that too many times. What do we really know about intermarried Jewish men? There are brief references to the Hollywood moguls who married non-Jewish women, a slew of fictional representations on television and the silver screen, and sociological studies illustrating a gender imbalance in religious and communal life. Even the tabloids cover interfaith romance as a hot topic, informing us that Orthodox Jew Jared Kushner married heiress Ivanka Trump, whose younger brother, I believe, also just married a Jewish woman, and Ivanka Trump converted to Judaism shortly before they wed. The nuptials between Mark Mezvinsky and former first daughter Chelsea Clinton continue to garner attention in the national media and the Jewish community, especially after the recent birth of their daughter, Charlotte. Reality TV has even gotten into the interfaith act. Little, however, is known or has been known or said about the hearts and minds of intermarried Jewish men. Until now. My new book, Marrying Out, contributes to a topic that has heretofore received sparse attention from historians to men and Jewish studies by looking at the intersection between religion and gender in the post-World War II period, 1945 to present, and change over time. It explores Jewish men's experiences with intermarriage and fatherhood, incorporating Christian women's voices in the narrative, as Miriam said, because these men told me, you must speak to my wife, so that these women of valor will finally also be heard. 3 main patterns arose from my research about intermarried Jewish men. First, American Jewish men's childhood experiences and relationship with their parents, not stereotypes about non-Jewish women, influenced the particular kinds of women they married and how their intermarried lives evolved. Although fictional portrayals, such as the 1972 film The Heartbreak Kid and the mythical Shiksa goddess, would have us believe that men actively sought out non-Jewish women for their physical attractiveness, or as one gentleman I was speaking with last night said when talking about the reason people intermarry, sex. Okay. Actually, Jewish men's expressed reasons for interdating and marrying non-Jewish women focused on Jewish Christian population ratios, falling in love and seeking partners who provided the acceptance or love that some had not actually received during childhood. Today I will focus on the second and third patterns. The second pattern I found was men shifting from more traditional to more liberal branches of Judaism and deepening their Jewish identities in the process. The fact that a clear majority of men shifted away from the affiliation of their childhood to a different affiliation is significant. Their transitions included from Orthodox to conservative, Orthodox to Reform, conservative to Reform, conservative and Reform to secular. And one man shifted from secular to Reform. The men's narratives illustrate the fluidity of Jewish identity. and the impact a single rabbi can have, negative or positive, on their Jewish identities and affiliations. Some Jewish men describe their paths from conservative and Orthodox childhoods to affiliations with a Reform congregation. Deciding who would officiate at an intermarriage sometimes influenced men's Jewish identity. When Fred Stevens asked the conservative rabbi in 1976 to marry him and his Gentile bride, the rabbi refused. He also told Fred he couldn't be a member anymore. Fred described the impact of this 8-minute conversation. That was the end of me being a conservative Jew. Morzaker, who wed in 1953, described his journey from conservative to Reform Judaism. It never would have occurred to me that I would be a Reform Jew. Reform was a strange thing to me, not fully Jewish. Interviewed a half-century after joining a Reform temple, Morris now believes that Reform Judaism is fully Jewish, and he insists, "I love being a Jew." Mark Enteman described rebelling against being brought up in an Orthodox synagogue and his marital negotiation, and then his journey through fatherhood to a deeper connection to Jewish life. I think when we had children, and really the rubber met the road then, and my wife said, if you want to bring them up Jewish, you have to step up to the plate and participate. Be an active member of the religion and become involved in a congregation. Be responsible for raising them. I agreed. I thought she was right. And you know, it's been an interesting journey since then because I've become very, very interested and much more comfortable with religion. Mark considers himself more Jewish now after intermarrying and becoming a participating member of a Reform temple than when he was Orthodox. His enhanced identity is based on having a better understanding of Torah, becoming more knowledgeable, being accepted in a community, and raising Jewish children. While many men expressed indifference about whether their wife converted, most were adamant about raising Jewish children. The more crucial issue regarding intermarriage is not how the individuals involved identified, but how their children were raised and what that would mean for the future of the Jewish people. The Pew Research Center's 2013 finding that only 20% of intermarried parents are raising their children as Jewish by religion confirmed the glass less than half empty mindset, while the fact that 61% are raising children with a Jewish identity of any sort confirmed the more than half full thinking. Now, the fact that the proportion of adult Jews with intermarried parents has increased is a direct reflection of the increase in the rate of intermarriage over time, from less than 17% among Jews who married before 1950 to 58% among Jews who married in 2000 or later. Fortunately, Pew also affords us a new way of looking at the children of intermarriage, thanks to analysis by my Brandeis colleague, Ted Sasson. From the older to the younger generation, the proportion of adult children of intermarriage identifying as Jewish has steadily increased. From the baby boomers, born 1946 to 1964, to Generation Xers, born 1965 to 1980, to the millennials, born after 1980. Okay, this is good news. Extant scholarship about the children of intermarriage contends more Jewish children are raised by Jewish mothers married to Gentile fathers than Jewish fathers married to Gentile mothers. And I'm not contesting that data. However, the majority of Jewish men in my study, from those who married at mid-century to those who married in the new millennium, were adamant about their children being raised Jewish. And this is whether or not their wives converted. Among the men who intermarried between 1953 and 1978 and had children, 9 out of 14 raised Jewish children. 2 men raised children with dual religious traditions, 2 as Christian and 1 as humanist. Among the men who intermarried between 1980 and 1989, 10 out of 11 raised Jewish children, and 1 is nothing. Lastly, among men who intermarried between 1990 and 2008, 8 out of 11 raised Jewish children. 1 man raised children as both, 1 is neither, and 1 is Christian. That more men in any grouping did not raise children as both or neither is noteworthy. More important, however, is to look beyond the numbers to what their personal journeys can teach us about Jewish transmission and about identity. While Jewish men, like most American men, may still do less of the actual childcare than do women, some Jewish men who have intermarried have at least been deciders. Keith Stoller described the conversation he had with his betrothed. When we got married, I made the point to her that if you don't want to convert, that's up to you, but all of our children are going to be Jewish. Fred Stevens, who married an Episcopal woman in 1977, told his betrothed, look, if we have children, they have to be Jewish. Otherwise, the deal is off. I have to get married in a synagogue. You can do what you want. The men's comments illustrate a lack of investment in whether their wives chose Judaism for themselves, combined with commitment to Jewish continuity through their children. The American men in my sample became more Jewish, not along denominational lines, but according to self-definition, and due to several factors, namely, a personal connection with a rabbi, a genuinely welcoming community, and Christian wives who made them step up to the plate after the men gave ultimatums that their children be raised Jewish. Disaffection for organized religion prompted moves for some men from Orthodox and conservative Judaism to Reform Judaism, which offered a Jewish nest for men who were turned off by rules and more traditional rabbis. Intermarried men also determined their own children's identities without citing the patrilineal descent decision adopted by the Reconstructionist and Reform movements in 1968 and 1983, respectively. We see him as Jewish, one father commented about his and his wife's view of their son. George Mays described how extended family members, however, did not consider his children Jewish, and as a result, they would not be given aliyot or allowed on the bima at their cousin's bar mitzvah. Given that his children became b'nai mitzvah and self-identify as Jewish, he contended, they're as Jewish as the next Jew. Intermarried men's senses of Jewish identity and continuity is from the ground up. It is they who declare the Jewishness of their children, not any rabbi, denomination, or movement. While intermarried Jewish men may help broaden the concept of continuity, traditional gender behaviors continue to influence American family life, including men's available time for parenting. There are certainly more dual career couples today than a half century ago, and the concept of equal parenting has begun to take root. Those Jewish men who married in the latter half of the 20th century they wanted to be different kinds of parents than their fathers were, sometimes resisting the corporate ladder to devote more time to being with their children. When Frank Smith was growing up in the 1960s, mothers were parents and fathers worked, he said. He was a good high school football player, but his father only attended a couple of games. Frank was determined to spend more time with his children, to be there for them. Frank's son was a soccer player, and Frank went to every game and many of the practices. While the reemergence of what historians dub new fatherhood of the 1970s and 80s helped men to legitimize spending more time with their families, it unfortunately did not fully reconstruct gender relations to create true equity in domestic or paid labor. Although some of the men were able to craft careers that allowed for flexible schedules so that they could be more involved with their children's daily lives, and I want to emphasize, they seemed happier as a result. The male breadwinner ethic continued to prevail. When asked how they envisioned their role as a husband, a man, a father, many men responded with the words, to provide. Additional characteristics included hardworking, financially successful, family-oriented, committed to helping others, and setting a good example. Men who intermarried in the 1970s and 80s used the term partnership and two-career marriage, a change from their predecessors who intermarried in the 50s and 60s. However, for the majority of men in these marriage cohorts, being the provider was still their primary defining role. Even those men who strove to share equally in the domestic tasks often admitted that their wives still did more around the house while they spent more hours working outside of it. Closer to the present, men who intermarried most recently seem the most invested in trying to balance career pursuits with fatherhood. According to one participant who intermarried in 2003, once his son was born, his life ended. It became centered on his role as a father and doing everything for his son, and eventually for his daughter too. However much men may want to be involved in their children's daily lives, the social reality in which they live makes prioritizing family life a challenge. For Charles Revkin, an accomplished physician who intermarried in 1997, his wife was glad to have a Jewish family, but told him, to the extent that they're Jewish, he would have to do the work to make that happen. The rationale was not a direct outgrowth of feminist thinking, as one might think, rather because she's not Jewish, and therefore said she didn't know how to go about it. And Charles pointed out, the only problem with that theory is that I'm at work 60 or 70 hours a week, which doesn't leave much time to ensure his children's Jewish cultural or religious education. Whether Jewish men want to cut back on their paid labor hours and increase hours with their families depends intimately on how they envision their roles as husbands and fathers. Like the women Betty Friedan described in her book, The Feminine Mystique, Jewish men suffer from an unnamed malady. In their case, however, it stems from competing priorities and communal disenfranchisement, rather than overeducated and underutilized minds. Men are caught between wanting to be mensches, who make the world a better place, and the American rules of masculinity that encourage them to win, to get ahead, to make more money. There is likely a relationship between the country's preoccupation with getting fathers to play with their children and what some Judaic scholars report about the disappearance of Jewish men from communal involvement, with the exception of temple presidents, and the difficulty of attracting them to the Jewish communal and professional workforce, suggesting that Jewish men became less involved over time. Some of the men in my study are highly involved in the Jewish community. In addition to serving on temple committees and boards of Jewish organizations, they have worked creatively to build a more inclusive community. Other men who have focused more exclusively on career building or supporting their family declare that they hope to be more involved when they retire. A large majority of the men express commitment to the ideal of social justice and related how their actions on behalf of the less fortunate are an expression of their Jewish values. Intermarried Jewish men's struggle to shape their own sense of fatherhood is part of the larger, ongoing movement in America to encourage men to become more involved parents. On Father's Day 2009, President Obama launched a national dialogue about fatherhood. In a public service announcement by the Ad Council and the Department of Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families, he stated, "Things can get busy. Sometimes we all fall short, but the smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today." Based on research about the ramifications of absent fathers in children's lives, whether due to work schedules, divorce, or incarceration, the billboards and PSAs all equated manhood with involved fatherhood. While Obama emphasized "take time to be a dad today," the message on billboards and subsequent PSAs by the National Fatherhood Initiative was, "It takes a man to be a dad." So anyone can become a father, but it takes a real man to be a daddy. Gender equality. Gender equality is not a women's issue or a men's issue. It's a human issue. Enabling intermarried Jewish men to better integrate work and family is a feminist goal, and reaching it will benefit both sexes. The issue of men's involvement in Jewish parenting in the Jewish community need to be looked at in their fuller contexts that include interactions with members of Jewish leadership and the ongoing American reality of men spending more hours away from their families and earning more than women for the same work. Active Jewish fathering needs to be seen as equally important as providing. Gender will persist in influencing the disproportionately low transmission rate of Jewish identity to children of intermarried Jewish men compared to intermarried Jewish women, so long as men's work outside the home continues to be socially valued more than women's work inside it, and men's identities continue to be fashioned by what they do rather than who they are. To conclude, encouraging men of all denominational stripes to invest in raising Jewish children is about acknowledging that while all American men may contribute more at home than they did in years past, they still do far less than women on the domestic front. It also requires confronting the reality that intermarried Jewish men have been shortchanged in the realm of domestic Judaism, sometimes inadvertently ousted by their wives who pick up the slack, and also neglected by the Jewish community that erroneously assumed that they did not come back after a B'nai Mitzvah because their Jewishness was unimportant to them or because women were present. Gender equality, in the words of the sociologist Michael Kimmel on how he became a feminist, is the only way for men to have the sorts of relationships we say we want to have with women, with men, and with our children, end quote. Intermarried Jewish men can raise Jewish children equally effectively as intermarried Jewish women. Let us, men, women, and children, act as partners to complete the unfinished business of the feminist and fatherhood movements to create, finally, gender equality in America. So, evolution or revolution? I say revolution. Thank you.